There's a pattern in history that has destroyed three global superpowers in the last 500 years. And right now, in 2024, in 2025, the United States is following that same pattern, stage by stage, decision by decision, almost like we're reading from the same script. In 1590, Spain was the richest empire on earth. Gold and silver poured in, armies marched, their currency was accepted everywhere. Within decades, they weren't defeated by an invasion. They were bankrupted by their own system. In 1914, Britain ruled the largest empire in human history. The pound was the world's anchor, the safe money. Within 40 years, that empire was gone, and the currency that once ran the planet became a shadow of itself. In 1991, the Soviet Union still looked like a superpower: nukes, satellites, global influence. Then it vanished in 900 days, not from a single battlefield loss, but from economic implosion. Different flags, different slogans, same ending. And here's the part that should make you sit up. Collapse doesn't begin with riots or bombs. It begins quietly, in boardrooms, in bond markets. In the moment a country starts borrowing to maintain an illusion, instead of producing real strength. This isn't conspiracy. This is documented history. By the end of this video, you'll know the 7-stage collapse pattern, and you'll see exactly where America sits on that timeline in 2024, 2025. Because if we're already at stage 5, the most dangerous part isn't behind us. It's next. Every empire, at the peak of its power, believes the same thing. This time is different. Different technology, different values, different people, different rules. They're always wrong. To understand what's happening to you right now, to your money, your savings, your sense that something feels off, you have to zoom out beyond headlines, beyond election cycles, beyond daily market noise. You have to look at history the way historians do, not as stories, but as patterns. Spain didn't think it would collapse. It controlled the world's gold and silver. It believed wealth itself made it immune. Britain didn't think it would fall. It ruled global trade routes and oceans. It believed institutions would protect it forever. The Soviet Union didn't think it would disappear. It had nuclear weapons and ideology. It believed control equaled stability. Each empire had a different excuse. Each empire followed the same path. First came expansion. Trade grew, power spread, living standards rose. Ordinary people felt hopeful. Then came normalization of debt. Borrowing wasn't seen as danger. It was framed as investment. Then came financialization. Paper claims replaced real production. Money started making money, detached from work. Then came quiet decay. Productivity slowed, trust thinned. The system became heavier, more fragile. This part is crucial. Collapse never feels like collapse while you're inside it. For most people living in these empires, life didn't suddenly explode. There were no dramatic announcements saying, the system is failing. There were just small changes. Prices crept up, jobs became less stable, taxes increased, benefits shrank, promises quietly changed. A British family in the 1940s didn't wake up thinking they lived in a fallen empire. A Soviet factory worker in the late 1980s didn't think history was ending. They thought they were going through a temporary adjustment. That phrase shows up every single time. Temporary, necessary, for stability, for the future. And here's the uncomfortable part. People at the top usually understand the pattern long before the public does. But stopping it would require giving up power, profit, or control. So instead, they manage perception. They stretch the timeline. They smooth the story. This isn't a moral failure of individuals. It's inertia built into large systems. Because once an empire reaches a certain size, it can no longer reverse without pain. And pain is politically unacceptable. So, leaders choose delay. Delay through debt. Delay through money creation. Delay through narratives that tell you everything is fine, even when your lived experience says otherwise. This is why history matters. Not because it predicts exact dates, not because it tells you who will win, but because it reveals what never changes. Empires don't collapse from a single mistake. They collapse from a sequence of rational decisions that make sense in the moment and are disastrous in the long run. And the most dangerous stage is not the final crash. It's the stage where confidence is still high, Warning signs are dismissed, and anyone who questions the system is told they're exaggerating. This isn't conspiracy. This is documented history. In the next part, we're going to take one empire, not as a chart or a theory, but as a human story. A place where ordinary people trusted a system that quietly shifted beneath their feet until belief finally broke. Before we move on, hold this thought. Every empire that fell believed it still had time. They never did. The moment an empire starts borrowing to protect its lifestyle instead of producing real strength, its fate is already written. It just hasn't been announced yet. For Britain, that moment didn't arrive with a single collapse. It arrived quietly, wrapped in confidence, tradition, and global dominance. In the early 1800s, Britain was the system. Its ships controlled trade routes. Its factories powered the Industrial Revolution. Its currency, the pound sterling, was trusted across continents. For ordinary people, life felt stable. Jobs existed. Trade flowed. The empire looked permanent. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Britain began fighting wars not with surplus, but with debt. Napoleonic wars, colonial conflicts, later, world wars. Borrowing wasn't framed as danger. It was framed as necessity, as patriotism, as the price of leadership, and it worked. For a while. The problem wasn't debt itself. The problem was dependence. As decades passed, the empire relied less on productive expansion and more on financial engineering. Bonds replaced output. Promises replaced surplus. The system became heavier, slower, more fragile, but still looked powerful from the outside. This is where the illusion becomes most dangerous. To the public, Britain still ruled the world. To insiders, the math no longer worked. After World War I, cracks widened. After World War II, they became impossible to hide. Britain emerged victorious, but exhausted. Industrial capacity had eroded. Debts were enormous. The pound, once the backbone of global trade, was no longer unquestioned. Then came the moment no empire ever believes will happen to them: loss of trust. Countries began settling trade in dollars instead of pounds. Capital flowed outward instead of inward. The currency weakened, slowly at first, then unmistakably. There was no dramatic announcement saying, "The British Empire is over." There was just adjustment after adjustment, currency controls, austerity, rationing, not during war, but after victory. Imagine being a British family in the late 1940s. The war is over. You won. And yet your savings buy less. Food is still rationed. Opportunities feel smaller than they did before. No one explains that the empire has entered a new stage. You're told this is temporary, necessary, responsible. But here's the part history makes painfully clear. Once belief breaks, power drains fast. Britain didn't collapse in flames. It downsized. Colonies became liabilities instead of assets. Global influence shrank. The pound faded from center stage. The system didn't fail suddenly. It was quietly replaced. And that's the key lesson. Empires don't usually fall because they make one catastrophic error. They fall because they keep choosing the least painful option in the short term, borrowing, printing, delaying, until no painless options remain. This isn't conspiracy. This is documented history. And if this story feels uncomfortably familiar, it should. Because you've seen a softer version of it in your own life, on a smaller scale, under a different name. When credit replaces income, when refinancing replaces saving, when maintaining appearances becomes more important than fixing structure, they didn't think they were collapsing. They thought they were managing stability. That belief cost them everything. And the most unsettling part is this: Britain wasn't reckless. It wasn't stupid. It wasn't uniquely corrupt. It was rational. It was respected. It was convinced it had more time. Every empire that collapses believes that. In the next part, we're going to move much closer to home, to a place that lived America's future decades early and paid the price before the rest of the country noticed. There is a place in America where the future already happened, and almost no one wanted to look at it. Detroit wasn't supposed to fail. Detroit was the proof of American power. In the mid-20th century, this city didn't just build cars. It built the middle class. Factories ran day and night. Wages were strong. Homes were affordable. One income could support an entire family. The system worked and people trusted it. Detroit felt permanent. And that's exactly what made it dangerous. As decades passed, something subtle changed. Productivity slowed, but confidence didn't. Costs rose, but optimism stayed. Instead of adapting, the system leaned harder on what had worked before. Debt filled the gaps. Short-term fixes replaced long-term investment. To workers on the factory floor, nothing felt like collapse. It felt like normal. Until it didn't. Factories began to close, not all at once, but one by one. Jobs moved overseas, pension promises were quietly adjusted. Entire neighborhoods emptied out, block by block, house by house. Here's the key pattern. The collapse didn't start when buildings were abandoned. It started when belief cracked. Once people stopped trusting that the future would be better than the past, everything accelerated. Banks pulled back, businesses left, the tax base shrank, public services decayed. And suddenly, what once looked unthinkable became unavoidable. Drive through Detroit in the early 2010s and you could see it everywhere. Shuttered factories, schools closed, homes worth less than their doors. This wasn't because workers failed. It wasn't because people were lazy. It was because the system had optimized for growth, not resilience. Detroit followed the same steps as every collapsing empire, just on a smaller scale. Expansion, overconfidence, debt masking decline, loss of trust, rapid unraveling. This is why Detroit matters, not as a tragedy to pity, but as a warning to understand. Because what happened to one city is now happening to entire nations. When you hear phrases like soft landing or temporary disruption, remember, Detroit was also told things would stabilize, that the downturn was cyclical, that innovation would save the day. It didn't. Once a system crosses a certain threshold, recovery requires accepting pain early. And pain is the one thing modern systems refuse to allow. So they delay, they borrow, they reassure. This isn't a bug. This is the system working exactly as designed. Detroit didn't collapse in a single year. It slowly became unrecognizable to the people who trusted it most. And here's the uncomfortable question you should be asking yourself now. If a city can go through all 7 stages without most people noticing until it's too late, what happens when the same pattern plays out at the level of an entire country? To answer that, we need to stop talking about stories and start talking about structure. Because once you can name the stages, you can no longer pretend you're not inside them. If collapse feels chaotic from the inside, it's because you're not supposed to see the structure. From the outside, historians always do. When you line up fallen empires across centuries, Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, the details change, but the sequence never does. Different cultures, different technologies, same underlying mechanics. This is where the fog lifts. Not because the future becomes predictable, but because the present becomes legible. Here are the 7 stages that show up every single time. Stage 1, expansion. Productivity rises, trade grows, real wealth is created. Ordinary people feel life improving. This is the honest phase. The system earns trust. Stage 2, debt normalization. Borrowing enters quietly. At first it funds growth, then it smooths problems. Debt stops being an emergency tool and becomes standard operating procedure. Stage 3, financialization. Money detaches from production. Paper claims multiply faster than real output. Finance becomes more powerful than labor. Wealth concentrates upward, but is still defended as efficiency. This is the stage most people confuse with success. Then something critical happens. Stage 4, currency abuse. Debt grows too large to repay honestly. So, it's managed, diluted, restructured. Inflation replaces taxation because it's quieter, harder to trace, easier to deny. This is where reality starts diverging from official numbers. Stage 5, trust erosion. This is the tipping point. People don't panic yet, but they stop believing. They feel it in groceries, in rent, in healthcare. In the gap between effort and reward, institutions still stand, but confidence drains out of them. Once trust goes, nothing works the same again. Stage 6, social fracture. Groups turn on each other. Politics becomes identity warfare. Blame replaces solutions. The system stays intact on paper, but cooperation collapses. Stage 7. Reset. Currencies change. Borders shift. Rules are rewritten, sometimes peacefully, often not. But the old system never comes back. Now, here's the part that most people miss. The danger isn't stage 7. By then, everyone knows something broke. The danger is stage 4 and stage 5. When the system still looks functional, markets still open, elections still happen, and experts insist everything is under control. This is where people are told, you're overreacting. This has happened before. The fundamentals are strong. And technically, some of that is true, but it misses the point, because collapse isn't about numbers going to zero. It's about systems losing legitimacy. A system can survive bad data. It cannot survive lost belief. This isn't conspiracy. This is documented history. Every empire that made it past stage 4 believed it could manage stage 5. Every single one failed. Why? Because reversing stage 4 requires admitting past choices were wrong. And large systems don't admit mistakes, they extend them. So, instead of restructuring, they rebrand. Instead of reforming, they reassure. Instead of stopping, they accelerate. This is where the trap tightens. And if you're feeling a strange tension right now, like things are still working but no longer making sense, that's not personal anxiety. That's pattern recognition trying to surface. In the next part, we're going to do something uncomfortable but necessary. We're going to take this 7-stage framework and place the United States right now in 2024 and 2025 directly onto it, not as speculation, not as opinion, but as observable structure. Because once you see which stage you're living in, you can't unsee it. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people sense, but few hear stated clearly. The United States is no longer debating whether it's in the collapse pattern. The only real question left is which stage. And in 2024-2025, the answer is hard to avoid. Stages 1 and 2 are long behind us. Expansion is over. Debt is no longer a temporary tool. It's the foundation. Stage 3, financialization, that is complete. Money makes money faster than work ever could. Asset prices matter more than wages. Markets react to interest rates, not productivity. That transition is done. What we are living through now sits squarely between stage 4 and stage 5. Stage 4 is currency abuse. Not in the dramatic sense people expect. No wheelbarrows of cash, no overnight hyperinflation. Instead, it's subtle, technical, framed as responsible policy. Debt grows faster than the economy can realistically support. So, repayment becomes theoretical. Inflation absorbs pressure quietly. Purchasing power erodes slowly enough that most people blame themselves, not the system. If you feel like you're working harder but standing still, that's not imagination. That's stage 4. Stage 5 is where it turns psychological. This is where trust begins to leak out of the system, not all at once, but everywhere at once. People stop believing official inflation numbers because they don't match grocery bills. They stop believing housing is temporarily expensive because prices don't come back down. They stop believing retirement will work the way it was promised. Institutions still function, markets still open, elections still happen, but belief quietly drains away. And belief is everything. This is the stage where people feel trapped but can't explain why, where personal debt feels inescapable, where savings feel fragile, where the future feels smaller than the past. This isn't a bug. This is the system working exactly as designed. Because stage 4 and 5 allow the system to extract maximum value before anything visibly breaks. Inflation shifts costs downward. Asset holders stay protected. Those without assets absorb the shock. They profit either way. You bear all the risk. And notice what isn't happening yet. There are no emergency announcements saying the system is failing. There is no official declaration of crisis. There is reassurance, optimism, carefully chosen language. That's how you know where you are. Every empire that reached this stage believed it could manage its way through. Every empire believed innovation, policy tweaks, or optimism would buy more time. They were half right. It did buy time, just not for the people who needed it most. Because stage 5 doesn't collapse the system immediately. It restructures who survives comfortably inside it. And this leads to the question most people avoid asking. If the system is functioning, but only for a narrow group, was that an accident? Or was it built that way? In the next part, we're going to look at the architects of this system, not as villains in a conspiracy, but as rational actors responding to incentives that quietly turned your life into a number. No system this complex and this profitable happens by accident. What you're living inside isn't chaos, it's design, not a secret meeting, not a shadow cabal. Just incentives layered on top of incentives, compounded over decades until the outcome becomes inevitable. This isn't conspiracy. This is how large systems actually work. Start with the architects. Not names, roles, bankers who earn fees whether loans succeed or fail. Credit agencies paid by the very institutions they rate. Corporations that profit from leverage, buybacks, and short-term returns. Lawmakers rewarded for growth statistics, not long-term stability. Each decision, taken alone, looks reasonable. Together, they form a trap. Here's how it works. First mechanism, you cannot opt out. Your credit score follows you whether you agree to it or not. Your access to housing, healthcare, employment, and insurance depends on systems you never consented to and cannot escape. Second mechanism, they get paid to measure you. Every check, every rating, every assessment generates profit for someone else. You are not the customer. You are the product. Third mechanism, they don't carry the downside. When the system misprices risk, you lose your home. You lose your savings. You lose time you can't get back. Institutions get bailouts, restructurings, or quiet rewrites of the rules. They profit either way. You bear all the risk. This isn't moral outrage, it's accounting. And here's the part that's hardest to accept. Most of the people inside this system don't think they're doing harm. They're optimizing for performance metrics, quarterly results, political survival, market confidence. The system doesn't require bad intentions. It only requires misaligned incentives. That's why blame keeps getting pushed downward. If you're struggling, you're told to budget better. If housing is unaffordable, you're told to move. If retirement feels impossible, you're told to invest smarter. But notice what's never questioned, the structure, because questioning the structure threatens the people who benefit most from it. This is why Stage 5 feels so disorienting. The system still functions, but it no longer serves the majority. It extracts from them, and it does so quietly, through fees instead of force, through inflation instead of taxation, through credit instead of wages. By the time most people realize what's happening, they're already too embedded to step back without pain. That's the trap. And it's not personal failure if you're caught in it. It's predictable outcome. The question now isn't who built the system. That's already answered. The real question is what this means for your actual life. Not in theory, not in policy papers, but in groceries, rent, retirement, and the future you're trying to protect. That's where we're going next. Collapse doesn't arrive with sirens. It arrives on a receipt. It shows up the first time you realize your grocery bill has doubled, but your income hasn't. Not because you're buying more, but because the same food now costs more energy, more debt, more instability to produce and move. This is what Stage 5 looks like in real life. Take housing. You're told prices are high because of supply issues, zoning, or temporary demand spikes, all partially true. But the deeper pattern is this. Housing has been financialized. Homes are no longer primarily places to live. They're assets to store value in a system that constantly erodes currency. When money loses trust, it hides in real things. And you pay the price to access them. Rent rises because landlords must outrun inflation. Mortgages swell because interest becomes a tool of control, not stability. Ownership slips further out of reach, not because you failed, but because the rules changed. Now, look at retirement. The promise used to be simple. Work, save, retire. That promise assumed stable money, predictable growth, and trust in institutions. Stage 5 breaks all three. Savings don't feel safe because purchasing power leaks away. Pensions depend on markets that require constant intervention. Retirement shifts from a right earned to a risk managed, so people delay. They downsize expectations. They tell themselves it will work out because the alternative is terrifying. Healthcare follows the same pattern. Costs rise faster than wages. Insurance becomes more complex, more expensive, more conditional. Care turns into a financial calculation instead of a human one. Education does too. Debt replaces opportunity. Credentials replace skills. The future is mortgaged before it begins. None of this happens because society suddenly got worse. It happens because Stage 5 redistributes pressure downward. Inflation doesn't hit spreadsheets evenly. It hits families first. You feel it when emergencies become destabilizing, when one medical bill threatens years of progress, when stability feels fragile even during good times. This isn't a bug. This is the system working exactly as designed. Because when trust erodes, systems don't collapse immediately. They harden. They extract more from those who cannot leave. They protect those who already have assets, influence, or flexibility. And here's the most important thing to understand. Feeling trapped is not weakness. It's information. Your anxiety is not personal failure. It's a rational response to living inside Stage 5. So if the system is a trap and you were born into it, the question isn't how to fix it overnight. The question is simpler and harder. What do you do once you finally see it? That's where this story ends, and where a different kind of thinking begins. There's a moment in every collapse that history rarely records. It's not the crash, it's not the riot. It's the quiet realization that what you were told to trust no longer matches what you're living. That moment is where you are now. You can't fix an empire. No individual ever has. But you can stop believing the stories that keep you powerless inside one. The biggest lie of a collapsing system is this. If you're struggling, it's your fault. History says otherwise. Empires don't fail because millions of people suddenly become irresponsible. They fail because systems reach a stage where survival depends on extracting more from the many to protect the few. Once you understand that, something important shifts. You stop blaming yourself for pressures that are structural. You stop measuring your worth by metrics designed to rank, not protect you. You stop assuming stability will return just because it always has before. This isn't about panic. It's about clarity. The mental shift is subtle but powerful. From the system knows best to the system optimizes for itself. From I must be doing something wrong to I'm living inside Stage 4-5 of a pattern that has broken empires before. From blind trust to deliberate awareness. Seeing the trap doesn't mean you escape it overnight. But it does mean you stop running deeper into it with your eyes closed. And that alone changes how you think about debt, how you think about risk, how you think about what actually matters. You start prioritizing resilience over appearances, flexibility over promises, family over abstract growth. This video wasn't meant to scare you. It was meant to give you context. Because people who understand the pattern don't disappear when systems reset. They adapt earlier, quieter, and with far less damage. If something clicked while you were watching, don't dismiss it. That feeling isn't fear, it's recognition. If this helped you see the pattern, share it with one person you care about, not to alarm them, but to give them language for what they already feel. And if you want to keep going, the next video looks at the one group that consistently benefits when empires fall, and how they prepare years, even decades, before everyone else realizes what's coming. The trap works best when you think you're alone. You're not.